Hi everyone, and welcome to your first lecture of the semester. In this lecture, we are going to focus on what performance ethnography is as a research methodology in communication studies and how we adapt this methodology to become the Hawktail Players, which tour local elementary and middle schools to teach about the diversity of human experience through the arts, which is a New Hanover County learning objective. First, I want to talk about performance studies as a discipline that is rooted in theater and English and communication studies. Let's start with the elocutionary movement. And the elocutionary movement was a moment in time where people realized that if they could take classes so that they spoke and carried themselves like a member of the upper socioeconomic status, they then could get more opportunities. They learned how to speak mostly through learning to read great works of literature and poetry aloud. And this helped them work on their accents and their cadence and their poise so that those around them would think they came from money, from education, and from power, and therefore would grant them new opportunities. We'll move from there to the interpretation of texts. So we move from saying, well, how we are able to read aloud can translate to how we're able to speak to others and give us opportunities, to the idea of when we read a text aloud, the text, the performer, and the audience are in a relationship of interpretation, and how the audience is interpreting the performer, how the performer is interpreting the audience, and how both are understanding the interpretation of the text can change meanings. And we move from this idea of performing a text aloud for an audience and how that changes meanings to performance as social behavior, and this idea that as we move through society, we take on different roles. Think about how you act when you're in a group of people you don't know, when you're in a place that you see as a professional setting, versus how you act when you're in private, when you're with people you're really comfortable with, when you're alone. And all of these different roles you play in society. And we move from performance as social behavior to performance as personal experience. And as personal experience, it also becomes cultural production. And this idea of how we interact with others impacts who we are. We become who we are through communicative interaction. So as we meet people and we perform who we are to them and we read their interpretations of us, our identity keeps evolving. It keeps changing based on each of these encounters as we reiterate past understandings or dismantle them and create new ones. Now, the term for this idea of all of our encounters going on and creating who we are in relation to others, as well as shared cultural meanings that we understand collectively and individually, is called performativity. So rather than who we are being inherent or biologically determined and therefore stagnant at our core, it's opened to interpretation, because as people respond to us, we read their responses, we understand how they're seeing us, and that impacts our understanding of ourselves as well as our understanding of others. And through this, we create shared cultural identity. shared cultural meanings, but while those can be deeply ingrained in society because we keep performing them over and over again, they can also be resisted. They can also be dismantled. Think of how over time our understanding of race, our understanding of gender, our understanding of aging, our understanding of sexuality has become more and more nuanced and complex as people have resisted past meanings and created new ones. And we'll have multiple meanings surfacing through these interactions, being reiterated and resisted. And part of this performative process is the performance of personal narrative. And the performance of personal narrative is when we choose, out of all the experiences we're having day to day, to take a few moments and give them a beginning, a middle, and an end that we're going to retell to others to help them understand us, to help us understand ourselves in a meaning-making process of storytelling. So when we talk about this, storytelling is part of what is called the new ethnography. And the idea that as we are interacting with one another and we are there to conduct research to understand a culture, that it is a co-creation, that the researcher is listening to the participants, the inside members of that culture. Those participants are performing who they are together and with the researcher. Because before, we used to sometimes think of ethnography, especially in its early stages, as the researcher being this objective, detached observer of the society. But we now know that in all qualitative research, including ethnography, including personal narrative research, that the researcher and the participants are working together to co-create meaning. Now, we also know there's power relations going on. And meanings are coming from interpretation. So, in the end, a researcher is forming conclusions that they're sharing with others. And in the new ethnography, part of that process is listening and working with the participants to understand deeply their understandings of themselves. So rather than just assuming, we work together with those we are researching with. In this situation, it's going to be people you're interviewing to create meaning together. This is a very significant shift because in the beginning, in the Enlightenment, when we were first understanding the scientific method, where you have a hypothesis, you test it, and you find truth, people were discovering so many things. They were discovering how the inside of the human body worked. They were discovering how our galaxies worked. They were discovering how atoms moved. They were discovering how nature around them operated. And they said, we believe we can test and predict human behavior just like all these other areas. And they were feeling this way over the centuries until we started pushing back and saying, no, humans aren't always rational. What humans do doesn't always make sense. We can't always predict it, but we can deeply bear witness to it. We can understand it. We can find patterns, and we can share those patterns with others through our interpretations. So we're going to talk now about the process of ethics, which often we think about as good versus bad and right versus wrong, but it depends on what you think is right. For example, some people see the good, the ethical thing to be the pursuit of freedom, that everyone has the ability to make their own choices and their own decisions. And this can be great, except when our choices and our freedoms and our decisions are hurting other people. Others say, well, really, we're only on this earth for a short time, so really what matters are our own desires for pleasure. And in the end, it's okay to be unapologetically selfish, to look for our own happiness. And while it is important to be happy, and it is important to enjoy who we are on this earth, sometimes our pursuit of pleasure can hurt other people, and this form of ethics can be problematic. Other people will say, well, really, the highest form of ethics is the pursuit of reason, of knowledge, of understanding the world. However, this can be complicated because what sometimes can happen, what has happened throughout history, is this idea of we have designated some groups of people as incapable of reason, as incapable of getting this knowledge, of obtaining these understandings, and therefore they should be oppressed and ruled over by those who have this higher understanding. And in this situation, we've had systematic marginalization. Others will talk about the greater good. Well, what's going to help the greatest number of people? And this sounds like a good idea until you're sacrificing some that maybe don't need to be sacrificed if we look at a way to help everyone and not just the most people. So that idea of like, even if it's very costly to save a very sick person, the society should still try to help its most vulnerable. Now, performance ethnography has a specific ethical lens. And this ethical lens is to make a difference in the world. We are looking to contribute to the quality of life and enliven possibilities for those who we are researching. So there is this idea that we want people to understand our research participants, to be able to empathize with them, to care for them on a deeper level because of the understandings we make. And we apply this ethic by helping our child audiences see the value of lived experience all around them. From people who have traveled to distant lands to learn about other cultures, to those who have stayed local, but had deeply meaningful experiences that they want to share, to show the possibilities of what can happen in everyday life to make stories worth telling. So how do we make sure that we are creating stories from the interviews that are going to accomplish these goals? One thing to remember is that the others and self are always linked. Do not forget your participants when you are focused on creating a great performance of children. Remember that at the core of this story you're going to tell is a person who took time to give you a story from their life and who trusted you. So make sure you create a performance you would be proud to share with them. A good test of this is, how proud would you be to do this performance with your participants sitting in the audience? Would they enjoy it? Would it be fun? Would they be honored? If the answer is no, then we need to revise. We need to do better. Don't fall victim to stereotypes. Sometimes it's tempting to make an over-the-top, crazy character that you think that the kids will really enjoy. But make sure when you're doing that, you're not falling into stereotypes that reiterate to these children that some people are just characters and not real. Be playful. Discover with your participant. Share drafts. Share ideas. Share character development so that that participant is part of this meaning-making process. One way to think about this is becoming a world traveler. And that travel might just be to your house you grew up in to get a wonderful story from a parent or grandparent. But make sure you are able to glimpse your relationship to them. How are they seeing you? How are they seeing themselves? How are they seeing the world? And then you're going to share that with the children we'll be performing for. So, things to think about is that we are going to go from oral storytelling to creating a script to then memorizing that script and turning it into a live performance. You need to truly listen to your participant. You have to record the interview so you don't lose their wording. You don't lose their phrases. You don't lose their structure as you are creating this performance. And what an honor it is to know someone's story so deeply that it's etched within your body and you're able to then perform it for others. Think of the deep listening, memorization, and performance of somebody else's story requires, and the honor that can be to that person you interviewed. Remember that there's risks and vulnerabilities. These people are taking a chance by disclosing to you, and honor that and make something that they're going to be at ease and very proud of. Make sure you're engaging the children without becoming so over the top that we're losing this story.